think there's the idea of a brand. Is there a Curtis Hill brand?
I think so. I think the suit presents that. I mean, I think most people, when they have an image of who I am, they see me as steady, stern, serious, and usually well put together.
That's you would equate that to the brand of Curtis Hill.
Yeah.
Is that the brand of governor you're looking to be?
I think so. I think we're offering professionalism, consistency, sharpness, quality, the types of things that you can rely on that are consistent.
Is the state not sharp right now?
I don't think so. I think the state has done some things that are well, but I think the state is kind of mixed up. I think you have to go back to 2020 as a prime example of that. 2020 illuminated a lot of what we believe our state has become, and even our country has become, just because of the reaction to the pandemic and the responses. Prior to that, those of us who believe in freedom, we wrestled with the notion of somebody trying to take our freedom, but I think what caught us off guard in 2020 is that we didn't realize that so many people were willing to give it up openly. You know, about half the country was okay with the shutdowns and the school closings and the church this and the whole 9 yards, and that was the puzzling thing. So I think there is a change in the sharpness of our government and our response.
What do you equate that to? The willingness part. Now that you've had some years to look at it.
I think what's happened is that so many people have gone soft on the notions of freedom and what it takes to be free. They've taken life for granted. They've taken our situation for granted. There's so many people who have no fundamental understanding of the fights and the sacrifice that it took to get to this point in the history of our country, that there's no willingness to stand up and fight for it. I had a neighbor, she'd be 105 years old if she was still alive. When she was in the Great Depression, she was very smart, but she couldn't go to college because girls didn't go to college, they didn't have enough money. Mm-hmm. So she went to work as a secretary for a factory. She was the smartest person there, and she and her husband would not buy Japanese automobiles. And the reason they wouldn't was because they still remembered Pearl Harbor and the feeling they had about being attacked and what that meant. And people in my generation would look at her and go, oh my, what do you mean you won't drive a Japanese automobile? But if you understood where she was coming from, right, the sacrifice that she made personally during the Depression, that she didn't get to be the person that she really could have been because of the times, and what she experienced in World War II, you start to understand it. But in this generation, you know, we try to create an environment where we're all safe and secure. We want our children to have better than we have. But what we're actually doing is we're creating generations of youngsters who don't understand how we got to this point. And that's a big, big problem that we have going forward.
So is this a parental failure or an education failure?
I think it's an American humanity failure. I don't think I would limit it to education and parents, or either or. I think it's a situation, let's take one at a time. Parents have that tendency to want their children to not have it as hard as they had it. So what do? We give them everything. And in giving them everything, we don't teach them the important things about life and earning things. I'm guilty of it, so we all do that. And subsequently, our kids don't have a deep appreciation for the things that they have because we've worked so hard to give it to them. The education system is very similar, and what the failings of the education system have in large part to do with we as parents turning our kids over to the education system as if it's the education system's responsibility to teach them, not recognizing that it's always still our responsibility and falling asleep at the wheel. Again, the pandemic illuminates that problem. So many people woke up to understand what their kids weren't learning or what their kids were learning that they didn't know before. So that's sort of a good thing because we have that wake-up call to see, wow, we're really on a slide here. but we were on a slide. I mean, and we're still on that slide in many respects.
Is education a public good, or is education a consumable product?
Ooh, it's an interesting question. I think it was intended to be a public good, to provide guidance and literacy to youngsters to further them along. I mean, education wasn't always what it was, and I think it was probably the first part of the 20th century where it came into being as a ordinary course of things. But I think it was intended to be a public good. But to your point, it certainly has become something beyond that, because we don't seem to educate kids with the idea of creating productive thinkers. We seem to educate them with the idea of a vocational skill or some object result. And I think we missed the boat there. Our education process we should be teaching kids the fundamentals of reading, writing, and arithmetic, and then enhancing that with a higher academic purpose. One of the things that I think is devastating to education right now is the way that these kids are unable to write. There's a lot of talk about reading and inability to read, but the real danger in communication is these kids have no clue how to provide proper grammar, punctuation, simple things, when to capitalize, and it's because they have this little electronic device that they use their text. Texting has become the literacy of the modern generation of youth. Mm-hmm. That's going to really, really be painful. Well, at least it has the potential to be painful if we're still around in 20 years. That's going to be a real difficulty for these kids as they're expanding into areas where writing and communication is really called upon.
There's an interesting statement that we view education as a goal to the employment. You've heard Governor Holcomb say that he would like to see coding as a requirement now in schools. Education shouldn't be to skilling kids up to have financial opportunities?
Education can include all sorts of things, but the basics of education is to provide an atmosphere in which a child grows up with a love of learning and an ability to learn different things, to be able to expand their mind. You want to be able to have a child who is engaged in the process of learning, so that when you're 25 and you no longer have a requirement to read, you have an interest in reading, you have a love of reading, you have a desire to read. That's what education can best instill upon a youngster, is that long-term, ongoing commitment to engage. If they get a job out of it, that's great, but that shouldn't be the purpose.
So much of what we hear and what we talk about is skilling up and being prepared for the world that comes. Should Hoosiers look to their schools as places that are going to help their kids be prepared for jobs going forward?
I think absolutely, but that's not the primary purpose. I think in any job that any child has after high school or college, they're going to need to read, they're going to need to communicate. Some jobs are going to require math skills, some aren't. So the skilling is there, but the idea of working in school so that you have a particular job, I think is short-sighted. I think it's limiting. I don't think it's what I want. I've got 5 kids. My wife's a teacher. My 5 kids are very smart, but primarily because my wife read to them in the womb, worked with them as they were youngsters, did all the things to give them advantages. What I like about my children is that they continue to learn. They're continuing to be engaged. That's what you're really after in an education process. Yes, they'll have jobs, and yes, they will benefit from their education in the jobs they have, but the best aspect of the education that our kids had is their ability to learn. I had a valedictorian, and then a number 3, number 5, number 6 students. One was 18, but he has a great personality. But they all were just great at learning. And one of the benefits that we had from being engaged as parents is I never remember having a time when I had to say to one of my kids, go do your homework, or you can't do this because you're not. They had a self-awareness and an initiation. Now, that came from parents who at an early age gave them a natural gate towards education. But once you establish that root, the rest is pretty straightforward.
The role of government. As you run for governor and you speak to people, the job of government in the state of Indiana is what?
To protect the freedoms that are enumerated in the Declaration of Independence. The consent of the governed is to provide shelter from freedom, or for freedom. We have one of the fellows on the campaign trail who consistently says that the role of the governor is economic development. And I completely disagree. The job of government, the primary purpose for government is to ensure our freedom, plain and simple. Beyond that, there are things that government may do if the people consent to it. There are things that government might want to do. But in terms of what the absolute purpose of government, the purpose of government is to preserve our freedom. So as I've described, my freedom is like a great big freight train rolling down the track at 200 miles an hour. Yours is too, going a different way. And as they get closer and closer to each other, government or law is a switch track that clicks to make sure that we don't run into each other and then lets us go by on our way. What government has a tendency to do is pops up more and more switch tracks and gets more and more cluttered and more confusing, and so our freedoms start to run all over the place. But in its purest form, government has a very basic purpose, and that's to provide us security for our freedom.
One of the things we've seen from Hoosier government was this announcement that FSSA, Family Social Services Administration, is going to have a $1 billion shortfall. Now, this isn't in actual dollars. This was in the budgeting.
Right.
And so what they said is, well, we need a way to figure out how to deal with this. And the way to deal with this is to take the families who have children who have issues, who are actually getting paid. Instead of paying a caretaker, we pay the actual families to take care of their kids, change the way that they're being paid, which has many concern that they're not going to get paid. And this way we're going to cut $300 million off of the shortfall. How do you get to a $1 billion shortfall? And as governor, how would you handle this?
Well, I think it's ridiculous, number one, that they got into that scrape in the first place. I mean, $1 billion error is pretty incredible. But the $1 billion error wasn't the mistake of the folks who were trying to protect and take care of their dependent children. That's ridiculous. I heard someone say that, well, we can't open up the budget. Why not? I mean, they made a mistake, and now they're dancing around talking about these great surpluses that we have. Well, do we have a $3 billion surplus, or don't we? Apparently we don't. So why not open up the budget, take the $1 billion out, and play the reality game with where our surpluses are? Okay, we don't have a $3 billion surplus. We only have a $2 billion surplus because we screwed up. We made a mistake. We're going to take that extra $1 billion that we claim to have as a reserve. We're going to pay our obligations, and we're going to figure out how to not do this the next time. That's a simple answer. It's a simple fix, and it's not on the burdens of those who really need the money.
This is all part of the world of Medicaid, but is when we talk about the responsibility of government, is this it?
Well, that's a different question. Because if you're going to go to the question of whether that's a responsibility of government, that's something that should be debated and discussed. It shouldn't be addressed on the heels of a shortfall. We've already made the commitment that that is a process that's in place that's going to be paid for by government. So under that current commitment, we fix and resolve that commitment. If we want to open that issue up and determine, is this the role of government, that's a whole nother matter. And it's not a easy issue. I mean, it gets into areas where how far does government go? What happens is it becomes easier and easier for people to push responsibilities off to government as opposed to on families. If you look biblically, the responsibility of taking care of orphans and widows was to the families, and then after the families to the church. We've gone well beyond that. A lot of families no longer want to take care of the widows and the orphans. The churches don't have the capacity to take care of the widows and orphans, so what do? They look to the government. From a compassionate standpoint, what happens if government doesn't step in? Do we want people in the streets and suffering and things of those natures? So it's not as, you can try to answer the question with a theoretical answer, but we have to deal with the practicalities of what do we do with the poor, with the downtrodden, with those in need. And those are very, very real questions, but we have to have the greater debates in terms of what our higher purpose is. But once we've made determinations, even if we disagree with what those actions are, once we've made those determinations, we have to stick to our obligations. And in that particular instance, the smartest thing to do, the most effective thing to do, and in fact the easiest thing to do would be to take the $1 billion, put it in the category where it goes, and take it off of our surplus. We no longer have a $3 billion surplus. We have a $2 billion surplus because we screwed up, and we're going to meet that obligation.
So government has a role to play, but you were I thought pretty clear about the role of government isn't just about jobs, and a veiled conversation about other candidates who believe that the role of governor is about creating these economic opportunities. This leads us to the conversation about LEAP and the LEAP district in Lebanon, where the state took the land. And people within that area said, I didn't know this was going to happen. I didn't have an opportunity. I didn't know this was going to be taken from me. And they're going to build these high-tech opportunities, these zones, these areas where Eli Lilly and others are going to come in. And a lot of these industries are high-consumption industries of, for example, water, so much so that we're going to now pipe water out of Lafayette, out of the Wabash, down and take the water away. There are people who support LEAP who will tell you that this is how you create dynamism. This is how you create change. This is how you create real opportunity in a state. Is it?
It certainly is if you want to destroy the fabric of your communities. This project is exactly what's wrong with government and in particular this state. I mean, look at it. Look at where they're picking it. They're picking Boone County, which is one of the fastest growth counties going. Why not go to Grant County? Why not take the project up to Gary? If you want to show me something, go make something happen in Gary, Indiana. No, they're going down to a place where it's pretty easy pickings, and so the state comes in and creates it makes itself a competitor with the local communities. That's not what state economic development should be about. State economic development, to the extent that it even exists, should be about providing assistance and backdrop for the various communities. It should be, no particular community should be geared up for success over another community. They're throwing billions of dollars into this project. And as you pointed about the water, if you've got to pipe your water in from 53 miles away, you don't have a viable project. If it's going to cost you billions of dollars to bring your utilities online, something's wrong. So the whole process is screwed up, but it speaks to the bigger issue of what the purpose of the Indiana Economic Development Corporation is. And to me, it's a shadow government. It is putting an organization in place that doesn't have the responsibilities and transparency that's required in the public setting, stick it over here in the private setting, and so it basically allows government to do the sneaky things and the business things that government can't do. And that's wrong. And
wait, say that part again. The IEDC does what in your view?
It provides the government an opportunity to do the sneaky things that government can't do. It provides, it does away with transparency, where government is required to be upfront about what it's doing. You debate it, you get it out in the open. No, we take money, we take public funds, we transfer them over to a private group, a quasi-government. What does quasi-government mean? It means it ain't government. So right. We don't have to play by the government rules. And by not playing with those government rules, we can do anything we want. We can act like a business. Well, government is not a business. Government has a requirement to be transparent. So that's something that I think we really have to examine. The Economic Development Corporation has probably more authority than any state agency, and has the General Assembly, the legislature, they bend the knee to it. This is a problem, and people need to recognize that if you want to have growth in your state or growth in your communities, that's wonderful. I support that 100%, but not at the cost of who we are. We're going to bring in 1,400 jobs into this community, but in order to do so, we have to change the character of who we are. We have to change to be attracted to this group. And then when we bring this group in, you know what we're going to do? We're we're going to abate their taxes for 25 years, but one day we'll get the benefit of this company coming in here and we'll all be happy about it. That's not a way for market success in my view.
But would that preclude the idea of marketing Indiana as a place to do business?
You absolutely market Indiana, but you have to have confidence and faith in that you have a marketable Indiana that can be attractive. We need to create the environment that our schools are wonderful, that our streets are safe, that our communities are thriving. Those are the ways that you create that environment. So if you have a company that's looking for where we're going to locate in Georgia, we're going to locate here, we're going to look at the positives that exist. So we need to focus on the infrastructure that we provide to create that positive. For example, if a company is looking for 12 months of sunshine, well, guess what? Indiana ain't your spot. Well, we don't have 12 months of sunshine, so there's certain things that we can't do. But what do we have? We have a great agricultural community. Maybe someone wants to put in a big farm circuit, something that is attractive for what we already have. So we need to match the interest that's out there to relocate into various communities with what we have in our resources. Now we can modify our resources, we can change our resources, but what I've seen is broad efforts to change our culture of who we are, and that we can't do.
You travel around, you visit all the counties, you do the Lincoln Day dinners, you've had enough rubber chicken to choke a horse. The conversation around the Hoosier Campfire, for all the talk about education, which is very, very real, by the way, and certainly the sleep conversation comes up, the conversations about property taxes and what has happened here in Indiana and how this last year took people by surprise and people feel abused about what took place and what they're spending. They thought things were capped, and yet look at these expenditures. How should or how would a Hill administration handle property taxes? And is there a place for whether it's seniors or veterans to hear from Indiana, you know what, you're covered on property taxes. You don't have to do this anymore. You've paid, you're good. We're going to make it easier on you.
Well, we'd certainly like to see a future like that. The problem with, I don't know what you call it a problem, the issue of taxes altogether is, it's perplexing. I mean, the bottom line is we have a government that we have responsibilities for. So the first thing we have to do in addressing where we are tax-wise is what is our comprehensive responsibilities for government? What is it that we do? What is it we have to do? What is it we'd like to do? Once we've made that determination, the issue is how do we pay for it? Where does the revenue come from? As I understand the basic tax structure, we have various pots to craft from that have various levels of volatility. The interesting thing that makes property taxes attractive to those who want to tax is it has predictability. It's sustainable because it's tied to land. So that's one of the structures that's in place. In looking at replacing property tax, well, you're either looking at eliminating it or replacing it. If you eliminate it, you have to put something else in its place because of what it pays for. It pays for local services, police, fire protection, schools, things of that nature. So if you're going to replace it or eliminate it, you have to replace it with something. If you're going to reduce it, you want to be fair in the application of the process. So what we would be looking at is an overall process of, first of all, what is it that we have to pay for? And then what's the best way of doing it? I've heard people who say, we need to get rid of the income tax. Well, get rid of the property tax. I mean, the bottom line is we need to make sure that we have, if we aren't able to get rid of these things, we'd have to make sure that the rates are fair, and especially as it relates to those who are locked in. I mean, the rates, if you look at property taxes, the rates are 1, 2, 3, the caps are there, but they don't cap the assessed values. And so what's been happening is the assessments are going through the roof, and that has sort of torn away at the whole idea of the structure of having the caps in place. We put the cap rates, but if you've got the values going up or the assessments on the value going up, that's not helping anybody.
But the property tax conversation does relate to this idea of I own a house, and property taxes state that I don't actually own the house.
Right.
That I'm still at the whim of the state. I understand how it supports local, but is there anything in a Hill administration that changes that dynamic? And you brought up the income tax. You're not in favor of eliminating the income tax in Indiana?
I don't like paying property tax, income tax any more than anybody else. But I also like to have the police down the street, the fire protection coming down. I like to have roads paved. I think we have to understand what it is we need. We have to have a revenue source. So it's not a matter of wanting or needing. We have to have that. Income tax, for example. You make a living. You get paid.
I'm in radio, please.
Well,
let's not call it a living.
You try to make a living. You get paid. And yet the government takes money out of your paycheck. That's the same philosophy as owning a house or owning property, and the government comes in and takes it away. So it all is a matter of a taking. What we have to try to agree on is what is the best measure of revenue source to provide the services that are required. The biggest problem that we have, whether it's property tax or income tax, is we're paying for too much stuff. We're paying for too many things because we've got bloat, expanse, education. 50% of our budget goes to education. That's great if you've got a great education system, but we're complaining about our education system all along. Now, what's going to fix that? We're going to throw another $1 billion? Is another $1 billion going to give us a better system? Well, you and I both know the answer is no. So if another $1 billion is not going to give us a better system, then could we take $1 billion away and not miss a beat? Well, the answer is probably yes. And so that's where we start having the real conversations of what is it that we want to do, that we have to do. How do we break this down and strip it down so that we fundamentally are paying for only what we need? You've got agencies, well, for example, the Indiana Department of Education. My understanding is there's over 250 positions within the Indiana Department of Education. What do? They have very little to do with why kids are not reading. Why don't we just slash half of them? That's what we're looking at right now, to propose to slash half of that.
Across the board, without any regard for anything else?
Yes.
Just boom.
Yes. We're going to look at those types of decisions in depth going forward, because there is a huge bureaucracy within the state government. We think of bureaucracy, we think of what goes on in Washington, D.C. It's the same thing here. Mm-hmm. It's the kind of bureaucracy we've talked about a great deal on the campaign trail. The Bureau of Motor Vehicles putting an X on a driver's license. That wasn't a legislative decision. That was a decision made by a rule-making bureaucrat to put an X on a driver's license. Now, I took the position as Attorney General. Let's see, that's a substantive change. And because it's a substantive change, it should have gone to the legislature. And if they want to make the bozo move of creating an X, they can do it, because they can get voted out of office from an accountability standpoint if people don't like it. But you rule players, you do this, and everybody says it wasn't me, that's not the way it goes. So we need to make sure that the bureaucracy is in check, and we do that by going in and examining what's needed and what's not needed. That takes someone who has sufficient understanding of how government works, i.e. a former Attorney General who's worked within the state government, to go in and tear out the belly of the beast. So I think that, I think that the bureaucracy is ripe in Indiana for attack.
Let us discuss the knock on you.
Okay.
There was a scandal. You lost your law license. They threw you out of the Attorney General spot. And this, running for governor, is a revenge tour. True or false?
False. Well, we certainly were attacked by some folks, but in terms of a revenge tour, not in the least. If you follow me on the campaign trail, you find out that we're not out there slinging unnecessary mud. We're talking about the issues that people are interested in. We're talking about the assault on absolute truth. We're talking about the manipulation of justice, the weaponization of race, the sexualization of children. We're talking about the things that people are concerned about in terms of the future of their families, their state, and their country. We present someone who has extensive history and accountability as a prosecutor, someone who led the state as Attorney General, who understands where the bodies are buried going forward. So this is a legitimate campaign based upon my love of my country and my belief in service.
What do you say to people who say to you, you were involved in impropriety and that's an unforgivable thing?
Well, we haven't tried to be very defensive about it. I mean, if you look at what occurred, what I was accused of, and what's interesting is the way that the legislative folks who kind of got this party started, Bosma and Company, the way that this was approached, this was an allegation that was 4 months after the alleged event, and an investigation by the leadership of the General Assembly. They came up with they put something out in the press that grope. Well, what does grope mean? Well, grope is a vague term that you use when you don't know what else to say. But when you look at it, essentially, I was accused of grabbing a woman's butt in a crowded bar. Okay, I've denied that. There were multiple investigations. Prosecutor investigation cleared me. There was an inspector general investigation, no ethical violations. They've sued me in federal court, sued me in state court. All of these things go nowhere, and yet this. Not only that, they had witnesses who came in and testified that they did not see me grab this woman's butt, and yet this smoke is still out there. And that smoke is out there because I represent to some people a real threat, a genuine threat as a conservative, as someone who speaks his mind. Keeping in mind, Tony, I wasn't recruited to come here and run for Attorney General. I'm not a part of the club. I'm not a part of the mix. I came in independently on my own. I went the old-fashioned way through a grassroots organization. I was not supposed to be the Attorney General. There were other people who were in line for that. Mm-hmm. We got 1.6 million votes, which is the highest vote total at the time in the state's history. That threatened a lot of people, and so I was put on a conveyor belt to ship out. Interestingly enough, we talk about election integrity, but for our convention in 2020, our party changed the rules and went from a live convention to a ranked choice system that everybody knows is not a fair system. But that ranked choice system was really what did us in on that race. So it's a combination of things, but it's primarily a matter of being a threat to being an independent voice.
What is the focus area of a Hill administration? You are in office day 1 through day 100. What is your administration looking to do?
We're looking to bring back faith in our institution of government, which I think is lost right now. We do that by a number of things, but one of the first things I've talked about is eliminating the DEI office. Diversity, equity, and inclusion have become bad words. Now, the subjects, diversity, inclusion, and equity themselves are noble things, but the concept of having this check-the-box mentality for diversity, I think it's destroying the fabric of who we are. It's bad for corporations. It's bad for government. So on day 1, we're getting rid of it. I think that's not just a symbolic gesture of where the state needs to go, but a very real effort to put us back on the track of real dialogue and real concern about what we are from a racial standpoint, from how we work together. When I was Attorney General towards the end of my term, I had a series of forums. I had a race and justice forum and a forum on race and mental illness. Mm-hmm. And the purpose was to bring together groups, bipartisan groups outside the state, inside the state, to have genuine conversations and meaningful dialogue towards solutions in these areas. DEI doesn't do that. What DEI does is it puts in some diversity czar and says, well, we fixed this problem, we've got this person on here, and the idea is to make sure that we look like a certain thing. I don't want to see anything about identity politics and how government works. The best way for us to make sure that we have, for example, young black men engaged in government or engaged in professions is to make sure that we've identified the kids who need additional support and help in grade school and junior high school and high school to make sure that they're qualified and capable to compete for those jobs. It does nobody any good to take somebody and put them in a position. I'll give you a kind of a bad example but it's an example. When Joe Biden That's what makes it a bad example. When Joe Biden announced that his vice president was going to be a black female, he did no good service to Kamala Harris. Now, I think she's a disaster, but I don't think she's a disaster because she's a black female. She's a disaster because she's a disaster. But he set her up to fail because she got picked because she was a black female. That's a dangerous precedent that we're in this country, right. And we need to start getting away from that.
But the DEI conversation, that's the first 100 days. I mean,
that's the first day.
The instituting or trying to reintroduce faith in the institutions, I got to assume goes further than a DEI office. The way people
Absolutely.
feel about government right now.
Well, we're going to have someone in the office that primary responsibility is going through the 30 or more agencies and identifying the fat and starting to slice away. I mean, the biggest thing that we can do is
Are the agencies failing us in Indiana?
I think most of them are. I think most of them are. What the bureaucrats do is these are people who stay in these jobs and these positions depending on who's elected, and oftentimes they're sort of giggling because they're just waiting for that person to move on and they stay in place. We see examples of that certainly in the Department of Education. We see examples of that in the Health Department. We see examples of that in FSSA across the board, DCS. Right. There are certain things that are occurring that give us hints into the problem. The BMV, where they're out of control, where the bureaucrats have taken over. The governor's office and the General Assembly seem to be powerless to step in and streamline these processes. I mean, we're talking about, 20 years of Republican administrations now.
Yeah.
In the State House. And yet, what have you seen from government? It continues to grow and grow and grow and grow. So theoretically, we talk about small, limited government, but we don't do anything to assure it. We can definitely go in there and start stripping away the excess and the fat and not miss a beat in terms of the quality of performance.
That is my conversation with Curtis Hill, the former Attorney General candidate for governor. You're watching all of the interviews with the Republican candidates here at WIBC and WIBC.com. You're going to be hearing these interviews played on the radio shows and all across WIBC. You're only going to find them here, right here at WIBC.com. So make sure you check out all the videos with all of the candidates, give them a listen, and then use that to help formulate opinions, ask further questions, see what other events they have, and attend them. Curtis Hill, thank you very much for being here. I'm Tony Katz at 93 WIBC.